Ma'am, please hold your questions to the end of the symposium. Thank you. Okay, let's continue on with labels, inscriptions, and attributions. Labels meant to be glued to furniture are rarely dated and usually have a decorative border on all sides. Designed as part of the top of a sales receipt, they were not meant to be glued to furniture. They are dated, and as a billhead is only part of a bill. They have no decorative border. The cautious collector does not accept a billhead as a label. Never be distracted from a thorough inspection by anything, including documentation. For experienced buyers in the antique market, an identifying mark or document rather than solving a mystery adds to it. It doubles the doubts, broadens the investigation, and increases the assignment, because both furniture and marks have to pass extreme scrutiny, because the client pays for both the object and the documentation, so please check both. As long as documented items bring higher prices, as they should and always will, documentation will surface and adhere to them. The challenge for the authenticator, then, is to distinguish between the honest documentation from the deceptive, identifying problematical attributions. The most common false identities occur in attribution, usually verbal and made without benefit of any documentation. Attributions may be to a particular craftsman or to a place of origin. If either type, they are routinely and cavalierly offered because they add value. Misattribution is an egregious pitfall. Yet fear of it has never daunted the owners of objects, antique dealers, brokers, auctioneers, or consignment shopkeepers. Attributions can innocently inaccurate or be intentional. The majority of misattributions are fostered more by a seller's wishes than by deception. Many times misattribution is purposeful and enjoys cycles of fashion. In America, in the early 20th century, when federal furniture was especially sought after, evaluated and reproduced, the big names of the federal era were Seymour, Fife, and McIntyre, became affixed to Boston, New York, and Salem furniture, respectively. The Seymours and the Fifes had large workshops, but they also had many competitors, spawning out many of their own shops after apprenticeships ceased. McIntyre had a small shop and would have needed an exponential amount of additional hands to produce all the carvings that had been attributed to him. Mabel Swan published in 1931 evidence that McIntyre's attributions, for the most part, were actually executed by Boston craftsmen. Therefore, the majority of the finest carved works of the federal Salem area was not produced by McIntyre's hand at all. But this did not influence greed-driven antique dealers and auction houses to promote the opposite, and brainwashed collectors continue to conjure in McIntyre's somewhat fallacious legacy. Regional attributions are more accurate but lack the appeal of the personalization that comes from a maker's name. Antique dealers are not alone in attributing falsities of regional styles to one man or shop. After Vernon C. Stonen, in reassessing and debunking much of Seymour's attributions, many major museums continue to display many of their objects with false attributions. These cases are so dissimilar to Seymour construction, they can in no way be attributed to a shop. With some museums still guilty about Seymorizing, many antiques have no qualms about doing the same. So any variety to Boston Federal work runs the risk of being called Seymour across the board. If interiors are painted a known Boston blue or contains lunette inlays, by the way, which were available to every Boston craftsman at the local supply shop. Seymour will be named the authority. Our eagerness as authenticators to determine the validity of attributions is especially paramount today, with such a plethora of information being spewed on, lying about attributions. Less positive information rises instantaneously with just the listing of a craftsman's name, leading to mostly false allegations and false leading names of examples of the work that have been discovered. So strong is the penchant for affixing a name that it is barely stayed by the presentation of contrary facts, such that a name is not that of a craftsman, or not a name at all. A legitimate antique should properly be attributed to a craftsman or a shop only after careful comparison has been shown to be closely related to a documented object. The documented antique must have a genuine maker's signature, brand label, or bill of sale, or be unambiguously cited in other papers, such as a journal or family correspondence. The accomplished authenticator will accept no attribution to a maker or an unmarked piece of furniture unless it can pass 3 tests. Number 1, it must be identical in construction to a documented piece. Number 2, the antique has proved to be genuine. Number 3, the said maker has been identified to have been a furniture maker. Identifying construction is easy. Ascertaining dovetails, tool marks, drawer assembly, etc. As far as the genuine goes, the objective is to avoid being taken by such ploys as transforming the man that owned the furniture in the cabinet maker that made it. Extensive lists of craftsmen, old newspapers, city directories, and published lists such as birth, death, and marriage certificates are available. Casual attributions are far too prevalent, so be aware. Again, for the attribution of an unmarked piece of furniture to be acceptable, the piece must be identifiable in construction to a documented one that has proved to be genuine and whose mark has been ascertained to be that of a known furniture maker. American furniture makers started signing their work after the Revolution. With this came a new economic condition, and the once ambiguous craftsman, almost in an arrogant fashion, began applying the signatures and labels to vie for trade, participating in the new free market economy. Today, all of these types of identification have figured in fraud some way, somehow. Leading and misleading inscriptions. The most important and exciting marks on furniture are inscriptions. Although there are exceptions, almost all inscriptions are authentic. Authentic, but not necessarily unambiguous or informative. An inscription penciled under a drawer bottom, married in the year 1810, these types of musings generally reveal nothing, because the style and construction of the piece shows that it was fabricated well before that date. Even an authentic inscription can be a mystery. The most common is a single or even just a last name with merely a first initial. A solid but scanty clue. There could be 50 published names as such when tracking that first initial. You will find it generally matches to the one of a large family of craftsmen. The ultimate inscription includes made by, name, address, and date, such as Hercules Courtier, 18 Plow Street in Alloway, New Jersey. All this information you could ask for, including the made by, which shows who the craftsman was, not the owner. Owners also signed their furniture such as back as the third quarter of the 18th century. As a result, owners of furniture have frequently been dubbed cabinet makers and so advertised and listed as such. Desks are typically prone to this in ink or pencil. Long case clocks are marked back as far as the mid-18th century by their repairs. Also, these type of clocks, their makers, are engraved or painted on the dials from about 1640 to about 1730. And then it becomes difficult. For retailers either demanded their names being put on the dials, or they would remove the craftsman's name and put their name on themselves at this point in time. Around 1740, there seems to be a shift in marketability, where towns and cities became more of a focal point for retail purchasing. Thus, some craftsmen had one less thing to worry about: marketing, economics. In addition, these long case clocks were generally never signed, many times being made by local coffin makers when dyeing was slow business. Long case clocks were marriages from the start. Case makers may offer 3 to 4 styles. Movement makers possibly 2. Dial makers 4 to 5 variations. Hence, the client and later the retailer would go from one shop to another, mixing and matching to his liking, creating the perfect marriage. A second marrying sometimes occurred as British clocks made their way across the sea, whether it be on a sailing vessel or steamboat. The transporting of weights, pendulums, mechanisms, and cases at times got mixed up or lost by the time of reaching the final destination. Cabinet makers, when inscribing furniture, used ink or pencil on the marking chalk that was always on hand. When you can find chalk inscriptions in old script, make sure you are seeing what is actually there, not what you wish were there. The desire to find a craftsman's name can lead to a highly imaginative misreading. Don't let part of an inscription or other distract you from the careful interpretation of the whole. Cabinet makers regularly mark their work with notes for themselves, such as upper, back, left, with a plethora of dimensions, and at times and dates. In the last 25 years, this was common practice in my studio. One does not want to confuse Bottom for Boston. When deciphering chalk marks, look for cabinet making notes and terms first. In many shops, the workers and apprentices would sign pieces and date them. It appears that there was no standard in doing this. No similar script, size, etc.